What if I told you there's a bridge in Louisiana so long that after 8 miles of driving, you can't see land in either direction? No shoreline ahead and none behind you, just water, sky, and the road beneath your tires. Oh, and by the way, you're not even halfway across yet. In fact, for nearly 10 miles, the horizon disappears. The world flattens out. The lake and sky blend into one continuous line, and the only thing separating you from the open water is a strip of concrete barely wider than a two-lane highway. Before it was built, New Orleans was essentially boxed in, cut off from the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain. Reaching it meant a 2.5-hour ferry ride, or later, a 2-hour drive skirting the entire edge of the lake. So instead, the state decided to take the shortest path across, creating a 24-mile bridge system that still holds the record for the longest continuous bridge over water in the world. My name is Scott, and I'm going to be your guide today. We're going to take a look at a creative engineering solution for a city that had nowhere left to expand. This is engineering the impossible, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. And by the way, this one was requested by our own BTE Caravan. Let's go beyond the exit. Running out of land is one thing, but building a highway across open water, well, that's quite another. Lake Pontchartrain itself isn't deep. It averages barely 12 feet, but that shallow water amplifies wind and wave energy in ways that punish long structures. And beneath it, there wasn't any bedrock to build on, just soft clay and organic ooze, as it was referred to. Then layers of sand. To span nearly 24 miles across that in the 1950s was seen as risky and impractical. But there was another large factor at play. In the post-World War II boom, New Orleans was busting at the seams. Lake Pontchartrain stretches nearly 40 miles east to west and, at its widest point, almost 24 miles north to south. On the southern shore, New Orleans grew denser and more crowded. Hemmed in by the Mississippi on one side, open water on the other, across the lake, the North Shore remained lightly populated for generations. But now, it looked promising for development. There was only one problem: getting there. For more than a century, the lake wasn't a destination, it was a barrier. Reaching the North Shore meant hours of travel by either boat or later by driving around the perimeter through low marshes and unstable wetlands. It was inconvenient, slow, and limited growth on both sides. By the late 1940s, the pressure to connect the North Shore, though, was undeniable. But how would they connect it? Artificial islands had been proposed decades earlier, but the lake bed simply couldn't support them at scale, and a tall, continuous steel span across 24 miles would have been financially unthinkable. So engineers made a different decision. Instead of building one massive bridge, they would build thousands of small ones, a low, repetitive structure that could be built like an assembly line, stretching in a straight line across the center of the lake, a causeway. Accommodation would have to be made for maritime traffic that still passed beneath it. That wasn't the hardest problem they faced. It was the one that was staring them in the face. How do you build the longest bridge in the world in the mud? By the time construction began in 1955, this wasn't just a bridge project. It was a full-scale industrial operation. They built the factory first, buying up 40 acres of land near Mandeville, creating a dedicated casting yard along the edge of the lake. It wasn't just a storage and staging spot. It was a full-scale concrete production plant. But what actually were they going to produce? The answer was a modular system, bits and pieces that were needed for the construction, kind of like a giant erector set built out of concrete, not just ordinary concrete either. Regular reinforced concrete, no matter how well it's made, will crack over time. Lake Pontchartrain is brackish water. The cracking in the normal concrete would allow the salt water to reach the steel reinforcement rods inside and eventually corrode those, resulting in bridge failure, much like we discussed in another video about the overseas highway to the Florida Keys. So engineers turned to a newer technology, pre-stressed concrete. Here's what made it different. Giant forms were built for the precast concrete sections for the bridge. Rather than using the steel reinforcing rods, steel cables were stretched tight across the inside of the forms. Once the concrete had hardened, that tension was released. The steel naturally tried to contract back to its original length, compressing the concrete along the entire span. The result was concrete already under compression, preloaded against the bending forces it would face. In other words, it would be very difficult to crack. The deck spans and support pieces called bents were all produced in this pre-stressed fashion, creating the massive slab and caps that form the visible part of the bridge. However, the cylindrical piling posts that actually hold the structure up were manufactured in a completely different way, because these 54-inch piles had to be hollow and incredibly dense to survive its environment. Crews utilized a high-speed centrifugal casting process called Senviro. The method spun the concrete at such a high velocity that it packed the material tightly against the outer walls of the mold, expelling excess water and air to reach a compression strength of nearly 10,000 psi. It resulted in a rigid pipe-like foundation that could be driven 90 feet deep into the soft mud until it reached the stable sand layers far below the surface. Once all the pieces were cured, they were loaded onto barges and pushed into the open water. Out on the lake, pile driving rigs worked from barges as well. Each cylinder pile was lifted into leads and aligned on template frames, then driven into the lake bed with steam-powered impact hammers. 2 piles formed a bent. A cap was set across the top. A deck top followed, and the line advanced. From the first pile driven in May of 1955 to opening day in August of 1956, crews completed the nearly 24 miles worth of bridge in just 14 months. In some cases even averaging more than a mile of finished structure in a week. The completed span measured 23.86 miles in length. Each deck section was 56 feet in length. In total, it required more than 2,200 precast spans and roughly 4,500 foundation piles driven deep into the lake bed to hold it in place. When it opened in August of 1956, there was a ceremonial caravan of officials driving the full length of the new bridge for the first time. The plan was simple: cross the lake, reach the opposite shore, and hold the dedication ceremony there. But the anticipation for the opening of the bridge completely derailed that plan. By the time the caravan reached the far end, traffic was so stacked up on the approaches, the officials couldn't even get off the bridge. So the dedication happened right there, and very soon the bridge was doing exactly what it had been built to do. Traffic that once circled the perimeter of the lake now moved straight across it. What had been distant shoreline became viable land, and the north shore began to grow. But the bridge had been built as a single thread across the lake. No shoulder, no median, and no pullouts. Just a narrow ribbon suspended above the water. Every stalled vehicle and minor accident caused huge delays. Because there were no turnouts, once committed to the crossing, drivers really had no alternative but to continue onward. The only exception being an area called the 9-mile turnout, literally 9 miles from the south shore. And by the early 1960s, traffic volumes had actually outgrown the design. Structurally, the design was excellent, but operationally, it was under a massive strain. Engineers knew they had already built a good thing, but they needed more, so they built it again. In 1967, construction began on a second parallel span, the same friction-driven foundation system and the same resilience of pre-stressed concrete, but refined. The yard it had been built in was still in operation, actually supplying many construction sites all over the region. The second span stretched just slightly longer at 23.87 miles and replaced the original 56-foot deck sections with longer 84-foot spans, this time supported by 3 pile bents rather than 2, reducing the total precast segments to 1,500 from the 2,200 used before. The new bridge would carry traffic in one direction only, separating the northbound and southbound flow, increasing bridge capacity, but also creating a safety factor that allowed an open lane should there be an accident or a stall. The new span was built 84 feet from the original, allowing them to create 7 emergency crossovers, since the bridge sections were 84 feet long themselves. This provided many more options for those on the causeway. When it opened in 1969, the crossing changed. The causeway was no longer a single thread, but twin lines running side by side across open water. As efficient, strong, and quick to build as the causeway was, it couldn't simply stretch from shore to shore. Lake Pontchartrain was and remains a working body of water. A 24-mile barrier at deck height would sever traffic completely. Around mile 8 from the south shore, The structure rises into a primary fixed high-rise, providing roughly 50 feet of vertical clearance for larger commercial vessels and sailing craft. The climb is subtle from behind the wheel, but on a map it's unmistakable. Farther north, near mile 16, the bridge incorporates a bascule drawbridge at the main navigation channel. Unlike the fixed high-rise, the span pivots upward when required, allowing taller marine traffic to pass underneath. Most days it lies flat and unnoticed, but when it lifts, traffic halts and the balance between road and water becomes visible again. Elsewhere along the crossing, smaller rises provide limited clearance for recreational and fishing vessels, but the majority of the bridge sits only 10 to 15 feet off the lake's surface. This low profile was a deliberate engineering choice to reduce wind exposure and structural stress during the Gulf's notorious storms. But the designers understood that a structure this long and this exposed was never going to live a quiet life. It would only be a matter of time before the lake tested their work, and as it turned out, they wouldn't have to wait decades for the first real disaster to arrive. On June 16, 1964, a string of barges broke loose in heavy weather and drifted into what was the lone span at the time. The impact was so great that it knocked 4 of the 56-foot deck sections into the lake, leading to a tragic accident where a Continental Trailways bus plunged into the gap, resulting in the death of 6 of its passengers. It remains the deadliest crash in the structure's history, and a brutal wake-up call that proved the bridge was vulnerable to more than just the weather. To this end, they installed heavy-duty steel and timber fender systems, but only at the high-rise and navigation channels. Though it withstood many violent storms, 4 decades later, its ultimate test would come. In August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina crossed Lake Pontchartrain, pushing a 9-foot storm surge and massive waves against the low structure. While 17 spans were displaced or unseated, the foundation of the bridge held. While other structures in the region were crippled for months, the causeway was put back into service much faster. Now, this wasn't just luck, it was logistical foresight. The Bridge Authority maintains a strategic inventory of spare spans and parts. This meant that they didn't have to wait for new designs or manufacturing queues to fix the damage. Basically, they had a full spare parts inventory sitting right alongside the bridge. The bridge reopened as a primary lifeline for emergency responders in a fraction of the time it took other spans. A bridge of this scale isn't something you just build and walk away from. You don't just maintain the causeway either. You operate it like a 24-hour, 24-mile machine. It actually functions as a small town over open water. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, about 8 miles out, you lose the shoreline. New Orleans disappears behind you, and Mandeville has not yet come into view. For a stretch, there is nothing but water in every direction. The visual isolation is a part of the crossing. Most drivers move across it without issue, but some don't. High winds, heavy rain, and simple anxiety can complicate this experience. The causeway has its own police department, and the officers patrol the spans continuously, responding to crashes, stalled vehicles, medical incidents, and debris in the roadway, and disabled drivers. In some cases, officers escort motorists across the remaining distance if they are unable to continue on their own. Another intimidating fact is the lack of a shoulder. This was finally addressed in 2018 and finished in 2020 with the addition of 12 large safety platforms, 6 on each span. These extended bays allow disabled vehicles to move completely off the travel lanes. Maintenance in this location is definitely ongoing. Crews continuously inspect and repair foundation piles, bent caps and joints, and deck sections on a regular schedule. Due to the brackish water, it's a constant battle against corrosion. Thanks to the modular design, pieces of the bridge can be replaced easily, including full spans. To someone who drives it all the time, the crossing can seem kind of mundane, a straight line across open water, but that simplicity depends on continuous inspection, enforcement, and diligent maintenance by a dedicated team. The causeway carries nearly 12 million drivers across Lake Pontchartrain every single year, from commuters and freight to emergency vehicles, because there still isn't a better way to cross. A place like this, known so well to so many, has to have a lot of stories to tell. Maybe you have one that you'd like to share with us and add to this tale. We would definitely love to hear it. Reading and answering the comments here is one of the benefits of creating this channel, and I think we really have an amazing and growing community. Maybe you'd like to be a part of that too. If you're enjoying what we're doing here, please take a moment right now and hit the subscribe button. We'd love to have you riding along with us in our big caravan. Many of you already have. In fact, we're getting really close to another major mile marker, 50,000 subscribers. It's completely overwhelming to us, and we are so appreciative. Also, we're changing the name of our newsletter, which was formerly called The Ledger. We're actually going to move it to something more appropriate for Beyond the Exit. We're going to call it The Extra Mile. I want to thank you all who have signed up already, and I'll leave a link in the description for those that want to join also. It carries all the extra details that we didn't get a chance to talk about in one video. We have lots of stuff coming up in the rest of 2026, and we would love to share it with you. I've been thinking about doing an actual channel update video. If that's something you guys would be interested in, please let me know in the comments too, and we'll make it happen quickly. We have some new series that are coming together right now, and a huge trip that we're planning to take on Route 66 this year. Now, we also know there are a lot of other places you could go on this highway called YouTube, so we appreciate you taking the time to go beyond the exit with us. As always, thank you for watching, and God bless.